When people talk about human sacrifice in the pre-conquest Americas, the first mistake is often the biggest one. Treating the Americas as if they were a single culture with one set of beliefs and one ritual system. They were not. The Maya, the Mexica, often called the Aztecs, and the Inca lived in different regions, under different political systems, in different periods, and practiced different forms of religion and ritual. So the real historical question is not whether sacrifice existed. It did. The harder and more important question is what exactly is confirmed, how certain the evidence is, what form sacrifice took, how frequent it was, and where later colonial accounts may have exaggerated, moralized, or misunderstood what they saw. Start with the Maya, because even here we need to avoid overgeneralizing. There was no single Maya empire spanning all times and places with one fixed ritual rulebook. Maya history is the history of many city-states and regional powers over long periods. So any claim about the Maya practice as if it were universal is already too broad. What is strongly supported is that Maya ritual violence was real. Maya imagery and inscriptions show captured nobles, bound bodies, decapitations, defeated rulers, and scenes tied to warfare and elite power. Archaeologists have also found physical evidence at some sites, including cut marks on bones, signs consistent with decapitation, and ritual deposits involving human remains. This is not speculative. Human sacrifice among the Maya is confirmed. But one of the most important points is that Maya ritual life was not only about sacrificing other people. Elite bloodletting is especially well documented and appears to have been central. Rulers pierced parts of their own bodies and offered blood as a sacred substance, a life force, and a link between humans and the divine world. That matters because it changes the picture. If we focus only on dramatic killings, we miss one of the clearest and most important Maya sacrificial practices: self-sacrifice. As for the sacrifice of others, the evidence shows variation rather than one standardized system. In different places and periods, human sacrifice seems to have been linked to warfare, the taking of captives, dedications, moments of crisis, dynastic transitions, sacred locations, and in some cases, cenotes. What remains uncertain is frequency and uniformity. The evidence does not support a simple claim that all Maya polities did the same thing, in the same way, at the same scale. This is where source criticism matters. Not every carved scene or painted image is a literal documentary record of a real event. Some images may be symbolic, mythological, or politically exaggerated. A ruler shown dominating captives may be making a statement about power, legitimacy, and cosmic order, not offering us a neutral visual report. So the careful conclusion for the Maya is clear. Real ritual violence is confirmed. But there was no single, uniform, standardized sacrificial system across all Maya societies. That caution also applies to one of the most popular claims in modern popular culture, that every Maya ballgame ended with the losers being sacrificed. The blanket version of that story is not solid. There is evidence linking ballgame imagery to decapitation, warfare, and cosmic symbolism. But that is very different from proving a universal rule that every game, everywhere, always ended in human sacrifice. The connection is real in some iconography and ritual logic, but the sweeping version is not well supported. Now compare that with the Mexica in late post-classic Tenochtitlan. Here, the documentation becomes much stronger, more concentrated, and more public. Sacrifice in Mexica state religion is not just hinted at through scattered images or a few burials. It is deeply integrated into architecture, festivals, warfare, tribute, and the visual performance of power. In this case, sacrifice is much more clearly documented as a state-staged public ritual. The strongest evidence comes from archaeology around the Templo Mayor. Excavations there have uncovered offerings, human remains, ritual structures, skull racks known as tzompantli, cut marks, decapitations, and ritual deposits. That physical evidence is reinforced by indigenous pictorial sources and Nahua traditions, which also confirm sacrificial practices. So on the basic fact, there is little serious doubt. The Mexica carried out human sacrifice, and it could occur on significant scale. Interpretation is the next step. For the Mexica, sacrifice was both religious and political. It was publicly visible and central to rule. It helped communicate the power of the state, the place of the ruler, and the relationship between war, tribute, the gods, and the city itself. But even here, caution is still necessary. Saying sacrifice was central does not prove that every war was fought only to obtain victims for sacrifice. Nor does every image automatically map one-to-one onto historical reality. Political and religious imagery can also amplify, dramatize, and idealize. The biggest uncertainty for the Mexica is not whether sacrifice happened, but the numbers. Some colonial accounts give spectacular totals, especially for major temple dedications. Those figures are often treated skeptically by scholars, because the claimed scale raises hard questions about logistics, the supply of captives, the available time, and the physical speed at which such rituals could actually have been carried out. In other words, one can accept that sacrifice was real, frequent, and important, without accepting every enormous colonial number at face value. That distinction is crucial. Serious scholarship generally accepts sacrifice and significant scale as well established in Mexican society. But many historians also regard some colonial figures as highly likely exaggerated. Why exaggerate? Because large, shocking numbers served moral and political purposes. They intensified horror, reinforced the image of a conquered people as barbaric, and helped justify conquest and conversion. So again, the best history sits between denial and sensationalism. The Inca present a very different picture. They are not mainly associated, in this context, with Mexica-style mass public spectacles. The best documented form of Inca human sacrifice is Capacocha, a highly ritualized practice involving selected children and adolescents offered at high sacred places. Here, the archaeological evidence is exceptionally direct. Mountain mummies preserved by cold have given researchers bodies, clothing, hair, and associated offerings. Modern methods such as isotope analysis, hair analysis, and CT scanning provide evidence about diet, substances consumed, health, and possible causes of death. This is not just a matter of reading hostile colonial descriptions. In the Inca case, the physical evidence itself is remarkably informative. What does that evidence suggest? Capacocha appears to have been relatively rare, highly formalized, and closely tied to imperial integration. Selected children came from different regions of the empire, linking local communities to Cusco. The ritual seems to have related to sacred mountains, ancestors, weather, fertility, times of crisis, and major political occasions. This is an important contrast with the stereotype created by lumping all pre-conquest societies together. The Inca evidence points not to constant public mass killing, but to a distinct ritual system with different meanings, settings, and scale. At the same time, colonial written sources remain indispensable across all three cases. Chroniclers such as Bernal Díaz del Castillo, Sahagún, Durán, and Cieza de León preserve information that would otherwise be lost. But they were not neutral observers standing outside history. They wrote within colonial systems shaped by memory, missionary goals, persuasion, and the political consequences of what they described. Some were recording indigenous testimony. Some were warning, condemning, or trying to explain. Some were writing long after the events. So these texts are essential, but they must be read critically, not reverently. That means asking a few basic questions every time. Is a chronicler describing something personally witnessed, something heard from others, or something fitted into a larger moral argument? Is an image or text recording a specific event, expressing a mythic pattern, or making a political claim? Does archaeology independently support the account? Are the numbers plausible? These are not minor technical questions. They are the difference between history and spectacle. So where does the evidence leave us? It leaves us in a place that is less dramatic than myth, but more solid than denial. Archaeology and indigenous sources confirm core sacrificial practices before Spanish conquest. Among the Maya, human sacrifice is real, but varied, locally specific, and accompanied by the central practice of elite bloodletting. No single standardized Maya sacrificial system can be assumed. Among the Mexica, sacrifice in late post-classic Tenochtitlan is strongly documented as a public and state-centered religious and political institution, though some spectacular colonial numbers are likely exaggerated and need independent corroboration. Among the Inca, The clearest evidence centers on Capacocha, a distinct and highly ritualized practice involving selected children and adolescents at sacred high places, not a Mexica-style system of mass public spectacle. The strongest account, then, lies between two bad extremes. One extreme denies the evidence because it is uncomfortable. The other takes the most lurid colonial details at face value and turns very different societies into one blood-soaked caricature. The historical record supports neither. Human sacrifice before the conquest is confirmed, but its meanings, forms, contexts, and scale differed sharply across Maya, Mexica, and Inca worlds. And the most sensational claims always require caution, comparison, and independent support. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, enable notifications, and suggest the next topic in the comments.